I was the assistant coach at Crystal Palace, both to Roy Packham, who was the head coach of the junior team, and to Danny Palmer, who was the head coach of the senior team. So I was in both roles, and I was still learning as a coach. You know, those were my rookie years. So we got Steve, along with a whole host, by the way, of other really talented young players who hadn't been coached, but they were from just down the road in South London, there in, you know, the Lewisham area, Deptford, those type of places. It was 1981-82 season when he first kind of came in, just turned 15. And he kind of, as was all those kids, raw, good talent, had a love for the game already, but didn't really know anything about what it would take to become a player. Until, of course, they walked in the door at Crystal Palace and met Coach Roy Packham, and that changed their lives. And Steve, to be quite honest with you, didn't stand out. He was one of a mix. Joel Moore came in at that time. He was just playing, enjoying the game, getting better. And of course, the improvement was so rapid in him and people like Joel and a couple of the other players that, and they were always exposed to the senior men as well, because we would practice before them and the kids would always hang around to watch senior practice. So they had that, hang on a minute, I think I want to take this seriously, and I think I want to make it as a player and see how far I can get. So those were the seeds back then. And of course, Roy and I would say to the guys, including Steve, listen, if you want to make it, you know, you got to do X, Y, and Z. And this is what it's going to take. And of course, a guy like Steve must have taken that on board and thought, right, not only do I want to make it, how can I make it?
Yeah, well, the first time I came across Steve, I'm a little bit older. So I think we were under 18s, and he was probably around about 16 playing upper level. And I remember a couple of guys I knew, Michael Hales, for example. I was like, well, who's this young guy? Because he impressed me in the game. He was like, you know, Steve Bucknall, up-and-coming guy. But yeah, he had a good game, you know, really impressed me. And then I think it was towards the end of that season, we had trials for the England under-18s, and Steve came along. And that's where I really first got to know him as a person. And we clicked, actually. I think we were in the same room. There's a few of us in the dorm, and we seemed to click. Unfortunately, he didn't get in at the time, and he was quite upset about it. And I think on skill level, he should have got in, but because he was younger, I think they went with some of the older guys.
As a player, I would say confident, dedicated, and personable. Steve was always, certainly when I was around him a lot as a junior, and certainly he provided a lot of the entertainment in the group. And even at that age, you know, he was 15 when we first knew him.
Well, playing style, he was talented. You can see he was talented, but he didn't evolve into the player he was at the time. He was quite raw. So decent athlete, worked hard, and I think that was the difference between him and a lot of the other players. His work ethic, you know, the way he went about his game, and he just wanted to be the best.
At the tail end of when we had him, there was 3 or 4 of our juniors who were the better players were invited to practice with the seniors. And Danny Palmer was quite a visionary in that. He wanted to bring on the young talent, especially the young English talent. So he would invite those kids to stay on after our practice. We'd go 6:30 to 8:30 with the kids, and then 8:30 to 10:30 with the seniors. So some of those guys would stay on. Steve was one of them. And lo and behold, they were finding they were actually able to hold their own for a few minutes every practice. Well, that was it. They got the bug. And now they were asking, you know, can you get us to the States? We want to go to the States. And Steve, you know, was more serious than a couple of the others. And you could see there was a sense of purpose that he had even at that time.
So the first time I met Steve Bucknall was the summer of 1982. And my coach from high school at Governor Dummer Academy called me and said that he was picking up a potential player, student, who was coming in from London. And since I lived so close to the airport in Boston, he thought it would make sense to bring Steve by my house and introduce him to a potential new teammate. So within an hour of Steve arriving on a long flight from London, our coach picks him up at Logan Airport in Boston and drives him over to my house not far from the airport. And you know, we're the same age and going into the same grade in school and had a lot in common, but obviously very different in that he's got the hardcore British accent. I have a hardcore Boston accent. So just understanding each other was a bit funny. And I remember asking my coach when we were out in the kitchen together, I was getting a cold drink for Steve, and I said, "Is he any good?" And our coach explained that he had never seen him play, but he came with very high references and found his way to our school through another British player called Martin Clark. Martin Clark was playing at Boston College at the time. He was a member of the same club organization, Crystal Palace, that Steve had grown up in. And that was the connection that the club organization, Crystal Palace, called Boston College and said, "Could you recommend any high schools for one of our younger players?" And that's how he was referred to our coach. And that's what led to him coming to Boston. You could immediately see the talent he had and athleticism he had. And what was amazing at that time, I believe, you know, he and I were 16 years old. He explained that he had only recently started playing basketball a couple of years before that. You know, he had grown up playing English football, as we call it, soccer in the United States, and had only recently taken up basketball. And I remember just being amazed, saying, "Geez, I've played basketball since I was 4 years old, and this guy just picked up the game a couple of years ago." And you just saw how special he was in getting a rebound and then going coast to coast and just understanding the game and being able to do things on the court that I had never seen anyone at my age do. So that was the first time I met him. That was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. Luckily, he decided to attend our high school. I think he had a good visit. I remember he attended a local basketball camp that we took him to. And, you know, he went home. This was in July. He went back to London and then returned in September as a new 10th grade student. And we lived in the same dormitory across the hall from each other. So it was the beginning of a very special friendship.
I was Steve Bucknall's high school basketball coach at the Governor's Academy in Byfield, Massachusetts. If our 1985 team was the best in Governor's basketball history, it is equally true that Steve Bucknall was the best player we've ever had. Steve's name appears over and over again in our all-time records. Over his 3-year career, he averaged a remarkable 26 points and 13 rebounds per game. In his senior year, Steve was simply unstoppable, averaging over 30 points and almost 15 rebounds per game. His 30-point per game average, his 758 total points, both in his senior year, still stand as all-time Governor's records. It's worth noting that this was before high schools had adopted the three-point shooting line, so I'm sure Steve's totals would have been even higher than this had we had a three-point shot.
We spent a lot of time in the gym together, along with other teammates. And right from the beginning, you could see that Steve had a work ethic that was very rare for kids our age. And that was contagious. And looking back, it was that work ethic that I think helped take our program to a new level. So I was with Steve all 3 years at Governor's Academy. It was called Governor Dummer back then. And it was a really special time. You know, it was a small school. We were asked to play a sport in each season. Steve played American soccer in the fall, basketball in the winter, and ran track in the spring. And, you know, he was just a special soccer player as well. That's one fact that a lot of people don't know about Steve, is that he could have played soccer at any university in the United States. He was that talented. I think he was all league in soccer from his first year of school all the way through his last. And I think it's probably helpful to tell a little story about Steve and what I call his coming out party. It was really that summer between junior and senior year. And he had spent the summer at my house in the Boston area because it was so important for him to attend the summer basketball camps. Even though he was a really special player in New England his first year in the school and the second year, he was still relatively unknown on the national scene. So he was invited to attend an all-star basketball camp called 5-Star Basketball Camp in Pennsylvania. And it was just after school ended our junior year, at the beginning of the summer months. And Steve was named the most outstanding player. There was an article written by a very famous writer who covered high school basketball. And the title of the article was, "A Brit is a Big Hit at 5-Star Camp." And he was on the national scene immediately when he was named most outstanding player. And the head of the camp, who also wrote the leading recruiting journal for high school basketball in the United States, wrote a description of Steve saying, here's a 6'6" athletic forward who can also cover a point guard. You know, his foot quickness and speed and defensive skills are that good.
In his senior year, filled with team and individual accomplishments, many memories stand out. Perhaps the most exciting of them came on February 6, 1985, when Steve Bucknall set a school record by scoring 47 points against our arch rival Brooks School. This is a record that still stands today. At the end of the season, Steve was named Team Most Valuable Player, Independent School League Most Valuable Player, and on a national level, he was named to both the McDonald's All-American Team and the Parade All-American Team. 35 years after his graduation from high school, Steve Bucknall still holds our school records for total points in a season, points in a single game, and career scoring average. But it wasn't all about scoring for Steve. He was also a fierce shutdown defender, routinely drawing the toughest defensive assignment.
You know, if I fast forward to our senior year, where our team went 24-1, and a very special year for us. The only loss we had was to a nationally ranked team from Washington, D.C. called Gonzaga. But we rolled through every other game we played in New England. So just one quick story about Steve. And, you know, if there's one game that really stands out in my memory, and it says a lot about who Steve is a game early in our season of his final year in 1985. And we were playing a rivalry called BB&N, Buckingham, Brown and Nichols. And we were down by 9 with a minute and a half to go. And I will never forget the timeout. Our coach called the timeout to kind of get us rallied and make one final attempt to close the gap. And I think most of us were, you know, already in our heads accepting the fact that this just might not work out. And Steve just erupted. And I'll never forget the look in his eyes and feeling like this guy is possessed. And I knew him well. I'd been with him for 3 years, but I'd never seen him so intense and, quite frankly, so mad at us. And I just remember being scared and feeling like, oh my God, we can't lose this game because we can't get back on the bus with this guy. He's going to kill us, you know. And I say that in a joking way, but he had that way. And long before this tagline became famous in the United States of refuse to lose, Steve embodied that. And that was a moment where you could just see that Buck refused to lose. And he said that to our team and our coach in the huddle in no uncertain terms. And I'll just remember that it rallied us, and we somehow, some way came back from being down 9 with a minute and a half to go. We took the game into overtime and actually won it in double overtime. But it was sort of an epic moment in that senior season. And I look back and it says so much about who Steve is as a person, and that all of his hard work, you know, really paid off. I think he scored, you know, like 45 points in that game. He had 45 points and 23 rebounds. And just, you know, led us to victory.
Steve Bucknall was an incredibly talented basketball player, but he was also a fierce competitor and the hardest working player I ever coached. He was an all-league soccer player, but he routinely came into the gym after his other practices were finished to work out and to work out hard. He always pushed his teammates to practice and play harder. His drive and determination made him a role model for our younger players, and I'm sure that's still the case today with with the younger players that he coaches. As a result of these accomplishments, Steve was recruited by virtually all of the elite Division I college basketball programs.
Because he was living in my house and his parents weren't in the country, my dad, who's a former coach himself, served in many ways as sort of a buffer between Steve and the college coaches. And I'll never forget, just going to these camps with Steve and seeing the interest in him after he had been named most outstanding player at this all-star camp. We went to another camp in New Jersey at the end of the summer. We went together. It was called Eastern Invitational. And this was after he had, created a lot of attention for himself at the Boston Shootout and at five-star camp. And I'll never forget, I think he was playing in an all-star game, and looking up in the stands and seeing, 50 to 100 college coaches. And they clearly were all watching him. And, we got home from that camp and the phone was ringing every night nonstop. And I'll never forget, I would answer the phone, and it was in our kitchen. And people would, understand to ask for my dad, because I don't think they were allowed to talk directly to the players back then. And I would always ask who was calling, and it was amazing. Head coach Terry Holland from University of Virginia, head coach Rolly Massimino from Villanova, head coach of Providence, head coaches of Miami, coaches from University of North Carolina. So it was really amazing to see the number of schools that were recruiting him, and then how aggressive those recruiting practices became. After the summer, we headed back to campus in September, and Steve was going back into his soccer season. And I'll never forget, I played football, and I would look over to the soccer field, and I would see all these coaches on the sidelines lined up watching him play soccer, just to be seen and recognized, to show their interest. But that's what the fall was like. And I remember, because Steve and I were in the same dormitories, we'd be in each other's rooms. And I remember early on, he was a big Michael Jordan fan, and he had a big Michael Jordan poster in his room, obviously playing for UNC Chapel Hill. So in the back of my mind, I thought that was the lead school in his mind. I never really pressed him, wanted him to sort of come to his decision on his own. But it was really special when he started narrowing down his list, and I think he got down to a list of the Final Four schools. He visited a few schools, including Miami, Villanova, which I joined him on that visit. That was fun, and a couple of other schools. And then in the fall, before our basketball season started, North Carolina got very serious about him. It was down to North Carolina and Villanova and one or two other schools. And we heard the rumblings from our coach that Dean Smith himself was going to fly up to offer Steve the scholarship, and flew on a private jet to a small airport nearby our school, and took a limousine to campus. And never forget when we saw Dean Smith arrive on our campus, and then met with Steve privately and presented him the full scholarship offer to UNC Chapel Hill. So it's really special to be around that and be with him at that really special time.
To get a scholarship to go to UNC, well, that was just incredible at that time. So, of course, when he used to come back in the summer, his improvement was off the charts. And we could see that. We'd have runs at Crystal Palace and elsewhere all over London. Steve would be around, and you'd see him play, and you think, wow, the improvement was incredible. So we saw that, and of course, the rest, as they say, is history with Steve, because he continued his improvement. So that kind of made Roy and I really fuzzy inside, to think that we had some involvement in his early development, and we're very happy to see him flourish in terms of his improvement. But of course, as I said earlier, his single-minded, you have to give it to him, because an old coaching adage of mine is if it's to be, it's up to me. In other words, you got to get it done. You can ask for help, but the bottom line, you got to do it yourself. And Steve was a guy who did do it.
So when I decided to take my visit down in Carolina, Buck was one of the guys that I ended up linking up with and hitting it off with at dinner. And I knew right away that, I was going to probably link up with him. We would be good friends. In my mind, on my visits, I already kind of had an idea of I wanted to go to Carolina, but after I got a chance to go down there and meet the team and Coach Smith and see them in their atmosphere, it was done deal for me. And I think our relationship just hit it off right from there, because he knew when we first met that I was a little different. And I think he liked that, and we just hit it off. It was the start of a great relationship. So 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, I was there, ready to play. And Buck was the first guy that I hooked up with. And everyone knows about Buck that knows him at all. But I definitely know about him as being a player. First and foremost, is his hard work. I've always been known as a guy that worked out in the weight room and did some running, but when I got to Carolina, and he was doing that, and he asked, "Come on, let's go running." I'm like, "Why are we going running, man? It's July." So he said, "Man, we got to stay in shape. We got to stay ahead of the game, da-da-da-da-da." So he was my big brother I looked up to, and he taught me some of that, what it takes to be a great player, what's expected of you at North Carolina. And that's what I tried to pass on to the guys behind me. It's always a grinder. So you would always find him in the gym. So that's why we always hit it off. And if you weren't in the gym, we were talking about you and making you feel bad for not being in the gym. So Buck wasn't blessed with a whole lot of minutes playing time when he first got there. So he would always be the first to tell you that he had to work for everything he got there. And, and I don't think he would have had it any other way. And I think that's the way we all liked him. That's what we liked about North Carolina. You come in there, you put in the work, and you get what you deserve. And that's why Buck was able to go on and have such a successful professional career.
So I had heard something about Steve Bucknall as a junior. He was part of a Crystal Palace team that had some legends of junior basketball. Buck, Joel Moore, Basil Phillips, just to name a few. But they were so good they didn't compete against our age group. So although we're the same age, under 17s, they were playing under 19s, and then they aged out. And he went off to the States before we had a chance to meet or play against each other. So you hear about people in passing. This is in the early 1980s, so there were no social media. It was just rumors more than anything else, unless you actually seen them. The first time I met Buck was 1987. It must have been July '87. In the lobby of a hotel, we were assembling at Heathrow Airport. We were assembling for the trials actually, I suppose, for the GB World University Games team, coached by Bob Brewer. Terrific experience that was. I met him in the lobby. He was just arrived. I just arrived. We shook hands, said, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Steve. I'm Martin." And that was it. So a friendship was born there. And for him, it was my first time representing England or Great Britain. So it was a very exciting time for me. But I'm sure must have done it before at junior level for England. But we weren't the best supported team in terms of resource. So we sort of, we went through an experience together that would have lasted a lifetime if that had been where it ended. We went out to Zagreb, and the people asked me what it was like playing with Steve. In those days, he was known as someone who did everything, but he was the leading scorer in that World University Games tournament. I don't know what he had averaged, like 27 points a game. And we as Great Britain as a team were not great. It was one of these tournaments where you had in your group stage there'd be one team that you had to come up against to beat to get to the top 8 sort of stage, and for us it was China. But to give some context of how good Steve was back then, he led the World University Games in scoring, and the Yugoslavia team was led by Drazen Petrovic, They had Dino Raja, Tony Kukoc. You know, this was an exceptionally high quality team, and Petrovic was second in scoring to Buck. I mean, that kind of tells the story. And he did certainly brought his level of intensity to the floor from day one. And that time that we went through in Zagreb, Yugoslavia as it was then, actually it was a good group of players for him to have been with, because although we weren't he was by far the most talented player, but the whole crew, there was about 6 players from Scotland, and there was a toughness on that team that I've never seen on any other GB or England team that I played with. And he led the way. And, you know, he was our standard bearer, but we backed him up to the hilt and gave every little bit that we could in support of him. It's hard to remember exactly what the first time we played against, you know, we practiced or trained together. What was clear from day one was that he had a talent level that was something I'd never had on my team before. You know, I'd seen a lot of great players, but not on my side. And he brought a level of intensity to the floor that you can't, indescribable. I mean, every single moment he was out there, he was ready to go. And if you wanted to be part of his gang, you had to bring it yourself. You know, there was no, once it came time to play, there was no joking around. But off the floor, it was more about jokes than anybody else. But on the court, Buck was all about business. And that was, you know, it was a learning experience. You know, part of the thing you learn about when you're representing your country is that it's bringing together a diverse pool of talented players. But Buck is certainly one of the most, if not the most exceptional player I ever had the great privilege to play with.
Buck, as we call him, was always our leader. Very strong mentally. On the court, you wouldn't want to go to battle with anyone else other than Buck. And that's what, you know, that's the type of players I wanted to play with. You know, I knew that Buck was tough. And I knew that King Rice that came in behind us, I knew him. I knew he was tough as nails. So those were the type of guys, and Coach would bring guys in on a visit. We let the ones know that the ones that we really would like could fit in. And that was just something that was passed on to Buck. Buck passed it on to me, you know, and that's just a part of the Carolina tradition, is that the older guys look out and try to hand down some of the older traditions to the young ones. And I think that's one reason Carolina basketball has been able to be so successful.
Well, when you're being recruited by North Carolina, you're always super excited, and you do a little bit of research about the guys that are already there. And while they're recruiting you, they talk about the guys mainly that play your position. I was very close with Rick Fox because we had gone to camps together, and Rick did his research on Steve Bucknall. And, you know, early in Buck's career, he wasn't playing a lot of minutes. So when you're a kid in high school and you're All-American, you think you're just going to go move guys out. So I thought I was going to start. Rick thought he was going to start. And then we get there, and I'm not half as good as Jeff Lebo is. Buck is like a dominant guy in the program. And Rick was a freshman thinking he was just going to beat this guy out that didn't play much. And Buck reminded us both very early in our career that, yeah, Steve Bucknall was a McDonald's All-American too. And you weren't going to just come move him out. And it sounds good in recruiting when the coaches are telling you, well, there's a guy here that's pretty good, but he hasn't played a lot of minutes yet. And there's a chance for you to play. So you take that as a young high school All-American, and you're like, well, I'm just better than this guy because he doesn't play. And Buck taught us that lesson the first day we got to campus. They took us down to the gym, and he just showed us very quickly, I'm bigger than you, I'm stronger than you, I know how to do this already. And then, yes, I was a McDonald's All-American too. Buck showed us he was stronger than us, He can run harder than us for longer. He was just as tough as I thought I was. And then he was tougher because he would get up early in the morning and train before all of us trained. And then when we would get up to train, he would be there to train with us. And we didn't know he was going 3 hours early. So he would lead by example, but his toughness level to deal with anything on the basketball court. Okay, Buck could guard 1 through 5. He's the person that in the summertime, I've never seen anybody be able to guard Michael Jordan ever. Steve Bucknall was the one person, and I'm a Jordan fan. Steve Bucknall was the one person that I watched with my own eyes that could make Michael have a problem scoring the basketball. And what he became as a senior, he was one of our best three-point shooters. He was not known for that. But he took the right shots. Like everybody throws around glue guy, Buck was a guy capable of being a 15, 20-point scorer, but he took the challenge of guarding the toughest player every year and really shutting those people down. And when I was a freshman, we were in the Final 8, playing to go to the Final 4. And Steve Bucknall had a broken big toe. And he wasn't supposed to play. And he kept telling me all week, young fella, I'm playing in this game. You don't have to worry, I'm playing in this game. And he couldn't even walk during the week of the game. And we're playing to go to the Final 4, and we are whooping at Arizona. Sean Elliott couldn't do anything. And we are winning the game, and he tweaked his foot, and in the second half, he couldn't play. He couldn't play the way he was playing. He tried to play, but he couldn't guard the way he had all of us guarding, and Arizona beat us. And I say that because he was our toughest guy. He became a scorer. He always guarded the hardest guy. He was one of the greatest leaders that North Carolina saw while he was in school. And that goes for before he was there to this day. He bled Carolina blue. He cared about us as younger guys. So when he was being the toughest, roughest, biggest brother, he also would come by the dorm. He knew you were homesick, even when you were trying to fake like you weren't homesick. And he would put his arms around Jay and say, come on, young fella, come to dinner with me. Hey, let me take you some places, show you the town a little bit, just to show you I'm going to compete and try to whoop you every day. But I'm also going to show you how to be a Carolina man. And that's why I call Buck one of the greatest leaders, and never even wanted any credit for that. But you check his teams, they were always tough. All right, any team he was on was always tough. They always won. And when he was one of the better players, he sacrificed himself to guard the hardest guy, to pass up the shot so J.R. Reed could be the All-American, so Jeff Lebo could be the main guy. He sacrificed that. Because in the summer, he scored the most baskets. And he guarded Jordan better than all of us. And he'd run more than us. He'd work out more than us. And it was like, Buck should be a main guy here, but he'll sacrifice to make our team good. And that's why, you know, you as a 51-and-a-half-year-old guy, I'm still proud to call him my big brother.
We did the Olympics in '88 together, which was a terrific experience. We went to another level. Suddenly we were playing with the best players available for Great Britain, whereas the student games wasn't at that level of intensity. We were the best players on that team. We went to the next level, and Steve was still the best player. I was not. I mean, this was a Great Britain team with, Carl Tatham, Rolton Way, Alton Berg got cut. That's how good that team was. Tony Balogan, Joe Welton was the head coach. And again, terrific experience that we had. But Buck commanded respect throughout that tournament. And, you know, that qualification tournament, again, Yugoslavia with Divac, Petrovic, Kukoc was a rookie then. The Russian team was exceptional. I think we finished 6th out of 8 in the European final qualification spot, and the top 5 went to the Olympics. which is something Great Britain had never done before. So it was a great team.
Buck was always about his work. Would go to school, he would get his work done first, make sure all his academic stuff was done. But if there was any free time, Buck and I would always find time to hang out and have some good times. Let's just say that Buck was a great guy, great teammate, knew how to have a good time, and you won't find many people that say they don't have a good time whenever Buck's around.
Well, I would say, sometimes when you're in college and you think you're cool, you have a party or something, and coach finds out. And then coach's practice was going to be, he's going to break the team. Because we went out when we shouldn't have, we were doing stuff we shouldn't, and you can't do that anymore. But back in the day, you could run people and run them until kids would not be able to do it. Some kids would start throwing up. Some kids would lay on the ground. Some kids. Steve Bucknall wouldn't even bend. Not break. He wouldn't even bend. And I was cut from the same cloth, and I'd stand on that line, and he and I would be looking at each other. Coach would be trying to break everybody. He knew I wasn't going to bend. I knew he wasn't going to bend. And I think it was his Jamaican upbringing by his dad, because I think he had a tough dad and mom like I did. And you weren't going to let a coach break you, no matter what the deal was. And there was days like that where we all leaned on Buck. There was days when we stayed up too late and probably hung out too hard. And the next morning, Buck would always be the first one there, leading the group, telling us if we're going to do it at night, we definitely have to do it in the morning. He really talked to me a lot about being a Carolina man on a daily, because it meant something. It meant something that we got recruited there. So if you were getting out of line, he would always pull you back in.
The first time I met Steve was actually in the States. I'd heard of Steve, and when I first met him, he was a big character, very mean looking. That's how he played his game, facial expressions. But, after the game, a lovely guy. So on the court, he was a beast. On the court, he was somebody who wanted to win at all costs, but win the right way. And he expected and demanded the best out of his teammates, and he led by example. So that was the first impressions I had of Steve. But also, he was very scary. I was a bit scared of him, to be honest. But when I shared a court with him, you're doing battle. So obviously you think you're just as good as your opponent or better. So even though he was on a better team, we would compete at a high clip, at a high level. So the respect was there, but there was no fear. So it was a battle. But after the game, we would always respect each other because we were cut from a similar cloth, similar backgrounds. Our games were predicated on defense. Obviously, Steve was an All-American, and he led by example. So it was our competitive nature and competitive edge that we had a mutual respect with each other. And then off the court, we had similar interests as well.
Nowadays, a lot of guys get a lot of juice just because social media and all these things. Back then, you had to be one of the All-American kids. So when he came over and went to, I think, Governor Dunbar or something like that, he showed everybody, I'm one of the best high school players in the country. Therefore, he's a McDonald's All-American. That showed you right there. That's when he was being talked about. When you choose North Carolina, you're almost saying, I'm going to the school that's best for the team. Okay? You don't come in the door, I'm an All-American, I'm doing, because Coach Smith wouldn't have recruited you if you were that type of kid. So, by him making McDonald's back then, I mean, now a lot of guys can get in because they're good, young and all, but he came to a new country and showed, I'm better than all the high school guys. I'm in the top 20. And make that game with all the politics that's involved, I think that showed he was as good as anybody. I think, if Buck chose one of the other schools where They wanted him to come in and try to get 20 points. He could have done that. He could have done that. But that was, all of us came to North Carolina knowing if I go to another school, I'm going to score more points. But if I go to this school, we're going to win a lot of games, and I'm going to have the best chance to really make the pros. And if I don't, I'm going to graduate and still make my parents proud and be able to have a good life. And I think when you chose that school, if you weren't, we had JR at that time. Buck came in before him, but then Jay came right behind him. You had Kenny Smith, Joe Wolf. These guys are all Americans. They're going to talk about them. And then by the time Buck got up there, he would have been, I don't know if he would have made national teams, but he would have been a national all-defensive guy, 100% back then. And now he might have been, because they didn't like naming that size guys, defensive player of the year. He would have won that because he was that type of defensive player. He would have been a national defensive guy. And he probably was close to winning it while he was here. He probably was really close to getting that because not many people guarded like him.
I was so happy that he selected North Carolina because it was really my favorite program in the nation, more as a fan than anything else, because I certainly couldn't even dream of playing at a level like that. So what was fun is that I and some of our other teammates from that high school team were able to visit Steve a couple of times during his senior year. Now, truth be told, I think we brought him some bad luck because, of course, we selected the highest profile, most competitive games, and they were fun games to watch him play. But I remember watching, them play Iowa on a nationally televised game in the new Dean Dome, and unfortunately, they lost in the final minutes. And the same thing was true. We wanted to be with his family, who flew over from London. His two parents and his sisters flew to see him play his final home game at the Dean Dome against Duke. And we were down there. I think there was our other four starters from our high school basketball team made the road trip from the Boston area to North Carolina. And it was really special to see, how well thought of he was in that Carolina community. Of course, we knew Steve, but it meant so much to see how appreciated he was and how popular he was. And if you've never really been to a UNC home basketball game, there's nothing like it. And it was great to see him in that environment. I wish he could have won those games. We never heard the end of it. He would joke with us saying, "Don't come back and visit anymore." But just after they lost that final home game, it was the last regular season game against Duke. He's in the ACC tournament of his senior year. And the Duke-UNC rivalry is like no other rivalry in the United States. These two teams did not like each other. And they were playing for bragging rights. The two schools, in case you don't know, are not very far apart. So they were playing for local bragging rights. So it added to the intensity and drama. And Buck scored his only 10 points of the game in the final 6 minutes. There was a turning point of that game where he had an old-fashioned three-point play. He scored, was fouled, made the free throw. And that gave Carolina the lead, in which they held on to for the rest of the game.
Boy, Duke really getting after him defensively. Bucknall puts it in and draws the foul. That's some character for you right there. Bucknall has been driving to the basket very effectively all day.
Scoring 10 points in the final 6 minutes of the ACC championship, puts Steve in the folklore of UNC basketball. And when you do a little bit of research and you look up top 20, top 25 epic games in that program's history, this game is one of those games that's referenced, and Buck's performance is highlighted as, an amazing contribution to that win.
Both these teams, we talked about Quinn Snyder and his effort today. Bucknall and Lebo the same way for North Carolina.
This is the last. They swing it over to Smith. Great defense by Bucknall.
Bucknall. You just feel the tension starting to build.
Fox, great move to the bucket.
So you're going to get me in trouble because I'll say tough as shit.
Bucknall, the senior scores, and a foul on Duke.
There have been 2 key points in this basketball game, Bob, where Steve Bucknall has taken the ball hard to the basket. Last time he got a 3-point play. This time he puts himself in position for one. That's just a great play by Bucknall.
Mental toughness, that's 2, and loyalty. I'll say that. If I have to use 3, his mental toughness is unbelievable, and his loyalty is a friend. Anything you ever need done goes without mentioning. He's one of the best. Anything you ever need done, Buck's always there.
One here has a chance for a second here. He has made every big play that North Carolina has needed him to make today.
How he did me as a little brother. And you can put him in any order. Tough, loyal, and caring. Okay, you could even say loving because he gives you his all. He gives you everything he has.
North Carolina is the ACC champion.
So my earliest memories of Steve Bucknall would have been through magazines, really. When he signed for the Lakers, we would have read about it in I think it was FIBA Monthly and Basketball News. You know, there was no league pass or internet or anything like that back then. So the only way you could keep in touch with the NBA, unless you knew somebody with a Pontel subscription, was through magazines. And of course, this was the end of the 1980s. So it was the Magic Johnson Showtime LA Lakers. And if you grew up during the 80s in England, you would have been conscious of the Celtics and the Lakers. They were the two big teams, and you would have supported one of those two. I remember the sports store around the corner from me would have a cardboard cutout of Magic Johnson and Larry Bird selling the old Converse weapons. So it was pretty cool. The guy from England was playing for the LA Lakers, but as I say, we didn't really see any of it. It was all through magazines.
Also in the ball game for the Lakers is Steve Bucknall. Now Bucknall is out near midcourt right now for the help to the 8-hour cameraman. There it is. And he is a lad that was born in London, England, came over here to go to North Carolina, and last year, despite J.R. Reed and others, this guy was the MVP there.
It was pretty awesome because back in those days, I mean, it was Magic Johnson's team, and another famous UNC grad called James Worthy was also an all-star player on that Lakers team, along with a lot of other great NBA players. So even though I'm a Boston guy, and in Boston we're not allowed to like anything about the Los Angeles Lakers, my best friend was playing for the Lakers, so I followed the Lakers secretly in Boston. And I remember, watching them play as many times as I could see them on TV. And he was a player, who played very few minutes, but he got his moments, and it was always fun to see him out playing in the real NBA.
As a measure of what a great defender Steve really was, I remember hearing stories when he was with the Lakers of how Magic Johnson always hated to practice against Steve because he was such a tough defender.
Buck worked his way into an NBA spot. I remember him putting in so much time before they had to go to any type of NBA training camp. He made the team as an undrafted rookie. That's harder, I think. Guys get picked in the first round, you're guaranteed on the team. This guy came in, and it was the Lakers when they were winning championships, and took someone's spot. And that shows who he was as a player, and not knowing. You pick the Lakers. Maybe if he picks another team, his toughness just gets him on. He picks the Lakers to go, and he makes it.
The NBA is a funny animal. A lot of times, there's a lot of politics that go on in basketball that, the guys are used that should get a shot don't always get a shot. Some guys that are there that might not need to be there. But, Buck never complained about that. He had this opportunity playing for one of the greatest organizations ever, took his shot there, and then went on to play professionally in Europe, where he's from, ever. So I don't think he'll ever have me in hindsight. I know he had a terrific professional career.
the LA Lakers were one of the first teams in the NBA to really start to travel on charter planes, and now every team does. But I remember back then we were dropping him off at the airport to board a private charter plane to play a road game in Phoenix. And I remember riding over to the game, and he said to us, take my Jeep. He was driving a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Never forget it. And we dropped him off, and I moved over to drive the car away with my friend. And Steve looked back and he said, "Listen, man, don't get pulled over by the police, because this car isn't my car." And I said, "Well, whose car is it?" He says, "It's James Worthy's car." He says, "This is the car that he was awarded last year when he was named the MVP of the finals." Back then, Jeep gave a Grand Cherokee. And it was just a surreal moment to be like, oh my God, here's my best friend driving James Worthy's Jeep that he just turned over to me and told me, I can't get in trouble because, it'll be a big problem. So it's quite a memory. But, I think if there was any team in the NBA to play on, even if it was only for one season, playing for the Los Angeles Lakers back then, when it was really the LA show, was really special. I remember going out with Steve and my friend Chris Rose and going to the clubs and seeing, LA celebrities and other players. And it was quite special.
And then the following year, he signs for Sunderland, which looks like a really bizarre signing, but probably wasn't quite as weird at the time. You've got to bear in mind that was 1989, so it was pre-Barcelona in the Dream Team, which really changed European basketball in a huge way. It was pre-Bosman, so there weren't as many opportunities for players to play in different countries as there are now. I don't think there were any English players playing abroad in 1989. If there was, it was one or two. So coming back to the BBL seemed less strange than it might do now if an English guy was playing for the Lakers.
I think it was a bit of an eye-opener for him, coming from the NBA back to the BBL and all the way up in Sunderland. But he definitely added something to our team. We had a pretty good team anyway, and then he took us over the top.
He had a successful first year. That was the dominance of Kingston, where they won 11 out of 12 for 3 years. The one they didn't win was they lost to Sunderland in the semi-final of the Cup down at Docklands, and then Sunderland went on with Bucknall, and the team went on to win that cup. And I actually did the stats in the final for that game, so I remember it pretty well. I mean, that team was stacked, but Steve was, right at the peak of his powers at that time.
And midway through the season, he came over to the BBL and joined Sunderland, and that was the first time I played against him. And that Sunderland team, strictly speaking, on paper, had more quality than the Kingston team I was fortunate to play with. And we had some rare old battles that year. I mean, Buck was, all BBL player. I was very lucky to play with a magical Kingston team coached by the great Kevin Cadle. And I think that's where we had the edge. We had the Cadle factor. But there's no question that Buck, I knew what I was going to face when I played against him. A level of intensity that made that Sunderland team an absolute force to be reckoned with.
Steve Bucknall gave us that extra edge, and I think that was a big reason why we won a couple of trophies that year. One being the Cup. Kingston were the almighty team at the time, and we beat them. And then the other being WICB, where to be honest, that's when I realised how good he was at that tournament, because we played a French team. Can't remember the name of them now. And they had a couple of big name players. One of them was a big inside guy, and Steve shut him down. He shut him down. We ended up winning the tournament. But that's when I really got to know Steve as a player and as a person.
We won the league, and we beat them in the playoffs. They beat us in the cup final. And it's funny, I remember before that game started, the finals, the players bump into each other in warm-ups. And I said, "Hey, what's up, Steve? What's going on?" And I was like, "What's wrong?" He said, "Man, I'm all about business today." And I was like, oh, God, okay. I mean, normally we were just all about jokes. I mean, we were fast friends from 87. And so here we are now in this cup final in 91. And I misread the situation. I should have realised then what we were up against.
I think you can talk about Steve in the NBA, but really what made his career so special was the impact that he had as a player when he came back to Europe. That first year back in Sunderland, where he made waves for, as someone coming from the Lakers back into England. But then those years he spent in mainland Europe, Greece, France, Germany, big time leagues at that day. And Steve Bucknall was one of the stars out there making a real impact.
He's the first player to play in the NBA from Great Britain, but he's also the first player to play abroad as a foreign import player. And pre-Bosman 1996, each team had 2 Americans, 2 import players, and it was very rare to find an import player from a different country other than America. They used to come now and again, but not very often. And Steve was hired at Ludwigsburg, Stuttgart, by Dan Palmer, who used to coach at Crystal Palace and Portsmouth in England. And Palmer's words to me were that the year before, he felt his Americans had been bullied by other Americans playing in the league. They bullied them on offense and defense. And he felt if he hired Steve, then he wouldn't get that. He'd get somebody who wouldn't back down to anybody, and Steve wouldn't get bullied. So he hired Steve Bucknall and Joe Moore to play as the import players for Stuttgart, Ludwigsburg. And he took a lot of flack for it, Palmer, when he first hired non-Americans for his import players. But it proved a success. They made the cup final, lost in the cup final over 2 legs by 2 points to Bamberg. And then narrowly got knocked out in the playoffs.
With the Olympic qualifying rounds, I remember going. There's a story where we were practicing in Mallorca. It was like a training camp there, which is not a great place to have a training camp, because the one night we were out partying, and we got back late. We had practice first thing. Kevin Cadle was the coach then. You could see everybody in practice was struggling except Steve. He was above everybody else. I remember going down dunking. I'm like, oh, how do you do that after a night out? And that's how he is. And that practice, but then that transferred into the games. He was a leader in a lot of the games. Not only was he our leading scorer, but he's the one that brought everybody with him. And that's what his game was about. Not only just himself, he brought everybody to the fore to help win.
So when we got to Steve at Thames Valley, we played the trophy final in January of that year, and we were doing pretty well in the league. But the problem was we were playing the Sheffield Sharks, and we hadn't played the Sharks before. And our big dilemma was who was going to guard Roger Huggins. We didn't have confidence to start a cup final with Neville Austin on him or Tony Holly on him, because Holly was going to guard Cawthorne. So that left Neville Austin. So what we decided to do was to put Bucknall on Huggins. We knew that Steve knew Roger, he knew his moves, and Steve's versatility mean he could guard the point guard position, the 2-3 at the perimeter, or even the 4 inside. And that's where we went with. We went with Buck starting the game on Huggins.
I know he had many standout games in Europe, and also obviously for the London Towers. So I can relate to that a little bit more, because obviously we were able to see him. Regardless of what Americans they had at the time he was playing, he was always one of the top, 2-3 players, including the 2 Americans.
He was just a really dominant player. He was one of those guys who could control a game. A lot of players can take over a game, but he had control of the game in a way that very few can actually do. And second spell back, played for the Towers, it was when they had their 2 years in EuroLeague. He played a season in the EuroLeague, and I think he averaged like 16 points per game in the EuroLeague, which again, you have to be pretty good to be able to do it at that sort of level.
I played in the NBA. He got an opportunity to play for the Lakers. Then he went to Europe, and then at the end of our careers, we're supposed to try to set it up that we could play together one time. So I had called my agent, and he had set it up with Strasbourg, Sig Basket in France. And I told Buck, and Buck said, okay, Sig Basket. He told his agent. He had it set up. I get there to Strasbourg, and he tells me, oh, man, I didn't tell him I got a better deal somewhere else. So it didn't end up working out the way that we wanted.
when the Bosman rule came in and we all became Europeans, he was one of the first to get snapped up, and he went to Iraklis in Greece, where I was fortunate enough to play against him there as well, because I played in Greece for 2 years. But you know, Bosman, it was like having an American, and an NBA standard American, as a European. He became a Greek player overnight. You know, and he never had any problems getting a job. You know, again, it comes back to the same thing. He brought fundamental skills to the game that meant he was never going to make any mistakes. He wasn't going to do anything wrong, you know, for that team. And so you could build a team around him. And the fact that he did it for God knows how many years across Europe, you know, we were fortunate to have him play over here for the years that he did. But, you know, you know, an injury here or there, a last minute trade here or there, and he'd have been a 10-year NBA player.
And he was probably more well known in Europe than he was in the United States, and had an opportunity to play in some of the highest leagues and some of the most competitive teams. But you know, he had over a 20-year professional career playing on teams in Germany and Italy and France, and later in his career really settling to play for multiple seasons in Greece. And I had an opportunity to visit him in Italy, see him play, which was really, really neat to see him play in the Italian league. And then a couple of years later, got to see him play in Greece as well. And you know, Americans don't really appreciate how competitive the European leagues were back then. Now, I think with all the great European players playing in the NBA, you know, Americans, you know, really know that basketball is you know, worldwide, and there's tremendous talent coming in from all parts of the world. I'd say Steve was on sort of the early side of that movement in terms of being sort of you know, a guy from the UK and playing with a little bit of European style, coming to the United States and making a statement that you know, there's a lot of talented players that have come over from those leagues. But you know, Steve, it just goes to show you, you know, how disciplined, how hardworking he is to have that long of a career in Europe, which is very demanding on your body. It's pretty amazing.
You know, Steve was a top quality player wherever he played in Europe, whether that was in Greece or Germany or France at all-star level. You know, and that is something that we miss. It's difficult for us to understand, especially in the modern game, where we have a lot of young British players who have been fortunate to compete in Europe, but they're not competing at the level that Steve was. You know, he was a starting player on these teams at the top level, you know, at the EuroLeague standard. And if we don't have, I think I know of one British player on a EuroLeague club, there's one at but there's nobody playing consistent minutes in the EuroLeague. If Steve was playing today, he would be a starting 5 player at a Barcelona or a Real Madrid or somebody of that ilk.
I think he had a great career. I think he would have wanted to have done more, as we all would have, but he played 10 plus years in Europe in the top leagues, and everywhere he went, he's been a winner. But the longevity of having to travel and play overseas for 10 years plus, mentally and physically, that's draining. That's something hard to do. And, you know, being away from your family, not being able to, you know, to put your roots down, and always knowing that, you know, if you don't play well, you could lose your job. The pressure of the professionalism of, you know, getting paid, playing for a top team, and being one of the main players. And one of the main things you have to do is win, playing through injuries, playing through pain. You know, it's not like now, if you get an injury, you can sit out. Back then, you know, there was cortisone shots. You know, if you had a bad ankle, you had to play on it, because that was our mentality back then. So he had an illustrious career, and I think it's up there with some of the great English players that have graced our shores.
I know JR played 11 or 12 years. My real dear friend Rick Fox played in the NBA 13 years. And Buck played more years than that. Okay? If you can play pro basketball longer than 10 years, you're a real guy. I mean, guys make it for a couple years and go, yeah, I was a pro. That's not a pro. A pro is what Steve Bucknall did. If you can play in multiple countries, okay, where people keep trying to get you, okay, you're a real pro.
You've got guys who have been British, maybe come over from the States, and they've been played 2, 3, 4 years. But Steve played, good many years here. Obviously he's gone into coaching now, but I bet he still could give some guys a run for their money.
He's an impact guy whenever he takes the floor, certainly for our national team, which, is a great measure, isn't it?
Make no mistake, Steve Bucknall was a ready-made 5-star product when I have seen him. Steve played for me almost a decade with the England team. Yes, he was a little bit of a favorite, but every coach has, do they admit or not. He had a very high position in the team hierarchy because every team sets his own hierarchy. So he was respected by his fellow teammates.
Playing with Steve for England and Great Britain, we were a family with him as the figurehead, but he was first amongst equals.
I played 50 caps with Steve. We played for England and Great Britain, and we had a lot of success playing, and it was very good. We had some great times playing. He led by example. He was always our leader, and the thing is, he treated everybody as equals. Didn't matter if you was in the starting 5 or the 12th man. He made sure that all players felt comfortable and we all respected each other. So Steve was always a very good captain, led by example on and off the floor. And, he drove us in the right direction.
On the court, I could use him almost all positions. He was regarded in the United States and after coming over as a defensive specialist. Here in the England team, he had to turn an offensive specialist. He had to score points, and he was able to do it, and he worked hard on it to be a good shooter, further improve his one-on-one skills.
We took the England and Great Britain teams to the doorway of levels that we'd never have been achieved. We knocked on the door of qualifying the Seoul Olympics. We were within a spitting distance of qualifying for a Eurobasket in the days, which is completely different to the qualification structures are now. We beat Russia, who at the time were, the following year became the runners-up in the World Championships. And Steve was at the front of all that. And so where he went, where he led, we would follow.
He often came to me and put forward his points and even argued with me in my room or privately, but never challenged my decisions when a session was run or the game was on progress. We were not outgoing buddies, but I must tell you, I liked him. It is very difficult for a player to stay with the team because it doesn't have massive financial reward, especially in England. But Bucknall still stayed, kept the boys together, and didn't run away.
And he kept on going long beyond when I was able to contribute to the national team. And I think that of that era, he was what every coach that coached him built their team around. I'm sure when you speak to some of the other younger guys that played with him, that they all would, without exception, would have been admired, not only his leadership, but his never-ending tenacity and will to win.
It is an exceptional pleasure when you have a professional player like him. I think Bucknall is a gem for England. Nobody is perfect. He made mistakes, but he could realize his mistakes. So it was something I can say very special in my coaching life.
Coach said with John Amici, Huggins, we're able to come through at the end.
Happy?
Yeah, definitely. We don't have to requalify.
Well done.
For me, one of the best things really when I was coaching the England team was the fact that I knew I needed a leader. I knew I needed somebody with experience, and Steve came along. It was just the right time, and somebody I knew very well. So he came in and he did the role I asked of him in terms of being a leader, off the court and on the court, and that was very successful for us. People like Steve and Ronnie Baker, but because guys look up to them. I know you say people see the records and things like that. That goes a long way. I think sometimes over the course of the years when we've been on teams, he may have got on at people because he just wanted them to be better and he wanted the team to be better. Some people couldn't take it, couldn't understand it, but it's all about trying to be the best, and that's what he brought out in guys. The main thing for me when I was coaching, we ended up getting the bronze in Melbourne. That was Steve's swan song, if you like, for the England team, and it was mine as the coach, and it was great that we both finished at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one because obviously players evolve and also the game evolved. So if you want longevity, which he ended up having, then you have to adapt your game to that. So I'd say let's take it from the early stage of his career. Certainly as a junior, i.e. under 19s as it was back then, and into the first part of his college career, I'd say he was sort of mainly an inside guy using the driving ability that he had because he was a good athlete with good size. He was 6'5" when he went off to high school, and then I think he topped out at 6'6". So he used that to good effect, certainly. And then he had post-up skills at that time again, because certainly at the junior level, he was, bigger or as big as a lot of the opponents. So he would find an advantage in the post. So that I would say, for me anyway, characterized his early career.
Tough as nails. He went all out on both ends of the court. And when I first met Buck and I knew Buck wasn't probably the best jump shooter around. But I saw his development. By the time I came in a freshman, when he was still working on it, and then by the time I was a junior, when he won big games for us with his three-point shooting and offensive play ability, Buck really was the epitome of a player that came in and worked hard and grinded and developed into a tremendous player and was able to play in Europe for many, many years as long as the NBA.
Offensively, he improved as we went on. So early doors, it was like, you play off him a little bit to give him the jump shot. Then he started hitting that jump shot. So now you're going to have to think about something else. He always gave you something to think about. And I remember one time I was at Sheffield, coming towards the end of my career. I was guarding him and he went past me and I'm like, wow, how did he do that? So I watched the tape, figured it out. Next time we played him, he tried the same thing and it didn't happen. So you always have to be thinking you can't rest on your laurels because he will hurt you if you do.
My memory of Steve as a player, well, first of all, it's the socks. Everybody remembers the socks, the knee-high socks that were his trademark, and that running hook shot that he had as well. But you just look at it, as I said, it's the way he could control a game. When the ball was in his hands, it went at his tempo. Things happened the way he wanted them to happen. He could score. He was a great facilitator as well, could find teammates and all of that.
Oh, Steve's playing style, it comes from growing up. When you grow up in the hood, when you grow up with nothing, and you've got to run to practice, and you play with older guys, and you're always having to prove yourself and work hard. And I think his playing style is predicated on hard work, and it's hard for players to play defense even nowadays. Defense is something that is inbred inside of you. You've got to want to play defense, And that was Steve's thing. He wanted to stop players. He wanted to be the best defensive player on the floor. He wanted to guard the best player so that he could show he was the best player on the floor. So not only could he score, but he could also hold you down below your average or stop you from scoring. So that's how good a defensive player Steve was. And it was all about hard work. He wasn't the best on the eye, wasn't the fanciest player. You know, he was a bit awkward looking when he played, but he was very effective. Steve's playing style is unique because back then, being 6'6", being able to handle the ball, you know, they had played him at the small forward, sometimes at the guard position. He could play the point, and to be able to guard guards, he could guard point guards, he could guard bigs. So he was very interchangeable, and it's very hard to think about players that, you know, emulated Steve. So there's certain players from his club, like Roel Graham, they would play similar to Steve, but Steve's a unique player to play defensively as hard as he did, offensively as hard as he did, but it was his engine, it was his energy, it was his work ethic, and I think that's second to none. So it's quite difficult to think of players that have his attributes, really.
Since I've known him since he was a kid, and then through his adult life, we've always had very pleasant meetings, exchanges, and wherever we met along the way, because obviously you lose touch with players along the way, and then through basketball, because we're all one big family, you inevitably see them down the road, and it's always been a pleasurable experience to reconnect with Steve.
To this day, I consider Steve Bucknall a great personal friend. Steve's son Marcus is now a student athlete at our school, and it's been great fun getting to know and work with another Bucknall. I enjoy getting together with Steve and his teammates socially, which we do quite often.
One of the great things about sports is teaches you a lot about life that you know, help you develop lifelong skills. And one of the great things about being on a team sport is learning from your teammates and being pushed by your teammates. And when I think about Steve as a person, first and foremost, I consider him a great friend. And he has been a lifelong friend and embodies everything that you want in a friend. He was the most outstanding teammate I've ever had, and an incredible leader. And I would want Steve to know, and I've told him this, that I've learned more from him by being his teammate than anything else that I've been exposed to in the academic world or business world. That, you know, Steve really demonstrated to me what it means to be committed to something. He demonstrated that you might think you're working hard, but there's someone else that's always working harder. And that's the experience I had with Buck, in that he was the hardest working guy I've ever been around. And that's contagious. And I think he has made me a better person, a better business person, because I adopted, I think, a bit of that hardworking philosophy. And lastly, you know, what they say about great players is they tend to be competitive. And Steve is maybe the most competitive guy I've ever been around. And having a chance to watch some of the Michael Jordan films recently and hear how people describe him as competitive, there's a lot of comparisons to, you know, my experience with Buck and seeing that sort of ultra uber competitiveness. And there's a lot of great players, but Steve is special in that he made all of us around him, his teammates, better. And you know, he's done that on the basketball court for many, many years, but I would really want everybody to know that he does that in his life as well, by applying sort of those life skills to everything he does. And if you know Steve, it can't help but be contagious. So I'm deeply appreciative of him sharing that with me, and I consider him a lifelong friend, first and foremost.
Buck is just that he's almost closest thing that I had to a brother. You know, I don't have a brother, I have a younger sister. And when like I said, when I got to Carolina, he was the one that really showed me how to do everything. And our relationship has grown like that over the years.
And to this day, I'm 51 years old, about to be 52. Steve Bucknall is my big brother. Okay, and I show him that respect as a man because how he led me as a young man. He's one of my favorites. He's one of the guys I stay in touch with. He and J.R. Reed, those two were my big brothers. And they still play that role for me to this day. And I take my cap off to them all the time. Because when Buck would come back, he made the Lakers. And that year we were having a bad season. And it was because we weren't acting like Carolina men. And Buck came back during All-Star break. And he grabbed me in a bar, actually, because I shouldn't have been out because our team wasn't doing well. And I was out thinking I was cool. And Buck came back to town, and he made it very clear to me that was the problem with our team because the leadership wasn't being leaders. And as a junior, I fell into a trap because I'm a better leader than that. He escorted me out of the bar and just showed me, again, how to lead a basketball team. And then we turned it around, went to the Sweet 16 that year. And then as a senior leader, I led my team to the Final Four. Thanks to him showing me how to be a leader, not just sometimes, not when it was fun, but all the time. He knows the role he played in my life just as a big brother. I was a wild boy, you know, and I didn't want to listen to everybody. And I thought I was tougher than everybody. And he had to show me sometimes physically that doesn't make you cool because you think you're tougher than everybody. So he played a major role in me growing up while I was there, and I still lean on a lot of the stuff that we did together that he helped me grow through. That's my take on Steven Bucknall. He's you have a special man there. He was special when I met him, and now just watching his walk in life, he's an example for me. I still get a little too hot. I think he laughs how mad I still get. Because when he came over and visited with us, he was like, man, you be getting hot, boy. And I told him I got it from him. But it says a lot when we can be friends 30 years after we played with each other.
Oh, well, don't want to go into too much detail, but he keeps me in check. I mean, the good thing with Steve is he'll tell you how it is. And a lot of people, you know, they don't like that. He doesn't mince his words. He's firm but fair, and he will tell you the things that you're not doing to make you do what you're supposed to be doing. And there's been quite a few times throughout my career where I've gone off track. I've thought I've been bigger than the coach or the team, or I've been bigger than the game because I may have had 20, 30, 40 points, or we may have won a game. And Steve's always reeled me in to say, look, you're only as good as your last game. If you don't get up and work out and you're laying in bed, you know, when the younger players come through, they're working harder than you. So he's always instilled in me, you've got to keep working hard. You've got to put in the time because of what you put in is what you get out.
This is one of the things I'll never forget about Steve was the fact that for our wedding, we scheduled it so there would be no England games, no BBO games, nothing like that. So that's fine. But close to the wedding, England team didn't make the qualification, so we had to go through a qualifying round. So they called the team up. I said, well, I couldn't make it. I'm getting married. Steve was one of the guests at the wedding, and he turned up at the wedding. He didn't do the England qualifying. So, you know, as you saw about 3 words, loyal is another one. You know, he's loyal, and he turned up. I'll never forget that.
Steve and I became firm friends literally from the day we met, when we got to that Great Britain team. In terms of our college positioning, both, you know, he was North Carolina, which was much better than VCU, but we were, you know, major Division I schools. Something just clicked between us from day one. and we were almost inseparable from then. You know, we were very important parts of each other's weddings. You know, I even lived in his house for a year when I first, after the Bosman rule. So I spent my 2 years in Greece, and I came back to London Towers in '98, and it was Steve's house that I lived in for a year. You didn't give it for free. You charge rent. Don't get you. We're not that good friends. But Steve is the kind of person that I don't need to talk to every day now. You know, we've got a friendship that does not need to be reinforced every day. And one thing, what makes me feel very fortunate in that is some people would consider Steve not the easiest person to get on with. But it was more, you had to earn his respect to be allowed into his inner circle. And that is a legacy from the training he would have had in his time at North Carolina. You think of that teams that he played with. So I was fortunate to be called a friend by him. And I know that if there was something I needed today, he'd go to war for me in the same way as he would have done it on the court when we played. You know, for as great as a friend that Steve is, we know each other's weaknesses. And I wouldn't call it a weakness. Steve is so driven. You know, he wants to do everything. And so he's not the best at delegating. And that can make him seem a bit hard-headed at times. You know, it's his way or his way. You know, so I think that maybe that's where we were or are good friends. I consider myself particularly strong at compromising and adapting to a situation, whereas Steve would not. Steve would bring, there was not, you know, he was a tough-nosed, man-to-man defensive player. You know, you doesn't want to hear about box and 1 and 1-3-1 zones. He knows how to play them, but when it came down to it, Steve was mano a mano. That was his line, mano a mano.
3 words. Ooh, that's great. Loyal, dependable, and honest.
I'll say driven, a fun guy off the court. We had a lot of jokes off the court. But most of all, I would say he's very a likable and approachable guy.
They don't sound very complimentary, the words have coming to mind. You know, because he's an arsehole because he needs to be. So, angry, passionate, winner.
I've been lucky enough to work with some of the top English players over the years. And if I list the guys, I made a quick list, you know, knowing that you'd ask me this question. And there are others, but these are probably the more, quote, famous ones and the ones that made the biggest impact on English basketball. So Roger Huggins, Peter Scantlebury, Sam Stiller, Joel Moore, Steve Bucknall, and Ronnie Baker. Now, there are others, but if you probably tot up the amount of England national team caps among that lot, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of caps. So where does he rank there? I mean, this is a tough one because I love all those guys, and you know, it was an honour to coach them, etc., etc. But probably I'd put Pete Scants as the number one in terms of, you know, what he achieved, the longevity, you know, the all-round play, everything concerned with Pete. But certainly, you know, Steve, if you like, played actually at a higher level than Pete ever did. You know, Pete maintained his whole career here. Steve, as we know, after the Lakers, you know, he played in some big-time European clubs. So that's why I don't like these barbershop conversations, you know, because you throw in that in the mix and suddenly people are going to say, oh, well, Steve should be above Pete then. Possibly. Has he got 90 plus caps or something for the national team? You know, I think Ronnie is way out in front. Then probably comes Pete, because I think Ronnie beat Pete to the record. And again, I'm proud to say I coached all 3 of those guys. So I think Steve, what I will say, you want me to sort of go out on a limb a little bit here with, putting him, where do we place him? I'll say this. Steve, after he retired from playing, and he had a good long career, and again, he kept himself in good shape, etc., which lends itself to that. He had this single-mindedness of purpose, etc., etc. He always wanted to try and be the best player on the court. What I'll say about Steve in terms of, more specific to your question, is that he obviously, after retiring, has now kind of, quotes, given back to the sport as a coach, as a mentor and motivator and activist with basically he went back to his roots in Lewisham in South London. And he told me, I remember he was at a clinic I was running over in East London prior to the Olympics. And, that was a catch-up time for us, and we were, having a nice conversation and everything. And he was saying that that was what he was planning to do. And he thought, look, I came from that, it was an unlikely journey, etc. And I want to try and give back to some of those kids down there to say, you can do it too. And I thought that was admirable. But he hadn't done it at that point. And, in latter years, there he was doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And I give him massive credit for that.
In the pantheon of great British players, and by that I mean born and bred, obviously, given the international nature of the sport, there's a lot of naturalised players. But including the naturalised players as well, I would put Steve in the starting five for every player I've come across since I've been involved with the sport, which if you go back to, going back to 1982, I would have Steve in that starting five, which that's, and there's been some great players that we've had over the years, especially those who have flipped their passport and picked up a British one. But there's probably never been a player that is more astute at every position on the floor, 1 through 5, but could play. The flexibility that he brings to any team means he's a no-brainer as a starting 5 player in that all-time Great Britain teams, and I don't think anybody would dispute that. I mean, you can bring some other names to compete with it, but when the push comes to shove and you have to measure it in terms of talent and the intensity, very few players have that ability, and Buck brings that to the floor. He's got the ability, and he backed it up with his performance on the court.
You just look back at the breadth of the career that he had, and there aren't too many English players who can match what he achieved throughout his career. You think UNC, Lakers, played in most of the big leagues in Europe, played in the EuroLeague. At the end of his career, of course, got a bronze medal at the Commonwealth Games with England as well. Played internationally. I mean, just a really great player. When you line up all of the great players that have come from these shores, he's in that conversation. He was that good. And that we got to see quite a fair chunk of his career in this country. We're pretty fortunate to have done so. Really nice guy as well. I got to know him a little bit. Just a tremendous guy off the court as well. And definitely a legend of the British game, without a doubt.
As a final tribute to his high school career, in 2015, Steve was elected to the Governor's Academy Athletic Hall of Fame. Look, here's the thing. Many coaches never get the chance to coach as talented a player as Steve Bucknall. I've had the opportunity to coach many outstanding players, but Steve Bucknall was the best of them all. I was particularly fortunate to get to coach Steve so early in my career, and this has opened the door for all the success that would follow for our teams.
Well, I know there were some guys, and I know while I was in college, and Buck took a lot of pride in this, that Carl Brown was at Georgia Tech. He acted like a big brother for Carl too, even though he was at Georgia Tech, because him being from England and over here representing, you wanted more guys. He always talked about getting guys over here. He tried to bring us over there to do clinics and camps. And when I was a freshman, we played in London for Buck's home game because he just wanted to bring more awareness to basketball and opportunities that he had because of this game, and wanted to shine a light back home for people to see from here that there was great basketball. And if kids had more opportunities, there would be more Stephen Bucknalls over here. And, you know, when a guy, he always did that for me. But when a guy that when he's in the States, there's not a lot of British guys playing ball. He's representing because he's at the University of North Carolina. So he's carrying himself, representing his country the right way. He's representing his family the right way, and bringing us over there to show us, hey, there's more people here. You can, and since I've been a head coach, that's what I mean. In the last 10 years, I've probably missed on 4 or 5 guys that Buck tried to get, you know, like, King, get on this kid right now. He's a young guy and he's a young lad. He'll say something like that. And I'll be like, all right, Buck, yep, we're going to get on it. And then I'll see a kid playing in my league, or there was a kid in the Midwest or like North Dakota, and I was watching one night and he was getting all these points, and I called Buck. I'm like, how is this kid out there? He said, that's the kid I tried to send you. So he's always been that guy, and it's hard being one of the first guys. It's hard, you know, but like I said, I know he wanted to represent his country the right way when he was here. Choosing North Carolina gave him a platform to do that. The way he worked, okay, people will recruit guys from over there just because everybody thinks people are tough like Steve Bucknall, okay, and willing to sacrifice his whole game to make sure our team won. So that represents where he's from very well. And I know, like, I'm looking at some kids right now that he pointed out to JR.
I don't think we've celebrated enough the history that Steve made just by getting to the NBA with the LA Lakers. In theory, he was the 3rd British-born player to make the league, but really the first to come through our system. And although he only played those 18 games there, it was an incredibly remarkable achievement in that era. And he did set the bar so high for the generations to come. He was the person who was that inspiration for loads of those players from generations ahead. And we shouldn't forget the role and the impact that that had. If you go back to when Steve was at college, going to North Carolina, the real blue ribbon program for so long in the NCAA, Dean Smith, for long the coach there, called him one of the best defensive players that you ever had. You don't become a Tar Heel, particularly coming out of London, without some real talent. And he was a player that had a very, very big impact, both in establishing the credibility of British players and in his own right in collegiate basketball.
He was one of the first guy, if not the first guy, that went to a big name college out there, North Carolina. One of the first guys really that brought our generation to the fore, if you like. Not only that, there's quite a few firsts for Steve. The first guy, English guy that played abroad as a foreign player. Him and Joel Moore went to Germany, the 2 of those. Again, you know, we watched them to see how they got on. Hopefully, you know, they did well there, and he did.
Steve is a basketball legend, and he truly put British basketball in the map. I remember growing up in Greece around the age of 15, 16, watching him play for Iraklis for a couple of seasons. And certainly Greek basketball in the 90s was really growing. And I remember the impact that Steve made and how he made Greek people more aware of British players and that the game of basketball is growing in the UK. So certainly he has made an impact, and we should recognize that. I mean, he's a basketball legend and has really helped British basketball get recognized across Europe.
And when I look at Steve now, you know, he's a student of the game, and just like you would judge an academic student by the professors they study from, when you look at Steve's basketball resume, He had a stellar high school career, was exposed to, a lot of great coaches and practices, but playing for one of the, best college coaches of all time at North Carolina, for Dean Smith, it's pretty amazing. And then to go play for Pat Riley in the Los Angeles Lakers. And then I'd say the opportunity he had to play for over 20 years in Europe exposed Steve to a lot of different coaching styles and a lot of different techniques that I think Steve is one of the best students of the game, having been taught by some of the very best and been exposed to such a broad range of basketball philosophies and teaching skills. And that's why I think it's so special that he's returned to his roots in his hometown area of London and is really, on a mission to sort of take basketball in the UK to the next level. There couldn't be a better person to do that. When you look at Buck's resume and who he has, quote, studied under and learned from, that's hard to replicate.
But Buck was always a consummate leader, teammate, and friend. That's why you won't be hard pressed to find many people who want to get on here and speak about Steve Bucknall. One of my closest friends, and the guy that showed me how to do this thing and showed me how to be successful with basketball. So all the success that he's had throughout his life and all the work that he's done with all the children of England, all the aspiring athletes is just tremendous. It just tells you and speaks volumes about what type of person he is. Certain players, when you play with them, you know that they've got that gene or they know how to deal with people. And Buck was just a natural leader. He's one of the guys that is always going to be the first in everything. And those guys that work the hardest always seem to be terrific leaders. And I think that's what's happened with him. I've been blessed and fortunate to be able to see his program develop over the years and what he's done, in basketball. And now he's really up there in the top of basketball, of English basketball. So it just shows that hard work and determination can get you anything you want. And your reputation and relationships that you make along the way, he's been able to maneuver through all of those and still been able to be one of the most respected guys in English basketball.
For me, Steve is one of the hardest working guys in basketball. What a lot of people don't realize, he's always working. He does so many things to do with administration, player development, coach development, personal development, mentoring, community development. He does so many things away from basketball and with basketball, and he works non-stop, getting up early, going to bed late, and he has a family as well. So he instills and he inspires and he sets the example, which I like to follow as best I can.
He's one of my most successful friends in the game of basketball. And, you got to say Rick Fox, too, because he got to play for the Celtics and the Lakers and won 3 chips. But Buck played longevity, and to me, that's the guys that won. They got to play a game for their whole adult life.
I think when you write the history of British basketball, eventually people will talk about Steve Bucknall as a true legend of the game. All that he achieved on court, but also what he did off court as well. He put back so much. He came back as a junior coach. He was free with advice to other players coming through. And I think that sums up the kind of legacy that Steve Bucknall's created for himself.